A Treatise of Satan's Temptations. Part 2. By Richard Gilpin. A Discourse of the Malice, Power, Cruelty and Diligence of Satan. Chapter 3. Part 1. Of Satan's improving these advantages for error, 1. By deluding the understanding directly, which he doth, 1. By countenancing error from Scripture. Of his cunning therein. 2. By specious pretences of mysteries, and what these are. Of personal flatteries. 3. By affected expressions. Reason of their prevalency. 4. By bold assertions. The reasons of that policy. 5. By the excellency of the persons appearing for it, either for gifts or holiness. His method of managing that design. 6. By pretended inspiration. 7. By pretended miracles. His cunning herein. 8. By peace and prosperity in ways of error. 9. By lies against truth, and the professors of it. What are the general advantages, which Satan hath to forward his design of error we have seen. It now remains that we take an account of the various ways, by which he improves those advantages, and those may be referred to two heads. 1. They are such stratagems as more directly work upon the understanding to delude and blind it. Or 2. They are such as indirectly, by the power of the will and affections do influence it. 1. First, those stratagems that more immediately concern the understanding are the use of such arguments, which carry in them a probability to confirm an error, though indeed they are but fallacies. Sophisms, or paralogisms, of which the Apostle speaks, Colossians 2:4, lest any beguile you, that is, lest they impose upon you by false reasonings. His usual way of proceeding in this case is 1. First, when he hath to do with men that are brought up with profession and belief of Scripture, he is then careful to give an error, some countenance or pretense from Scripture. It is not his course to decry the Scriptures with such men, but to suppose their truth and authority, as the most plausible way to his design. For by this means he doth not only prevent a great many startling objections, which would otherwise rise up against him, seeing men brought up with Scripture, cannot easily be brought to call them false, but with considerable advantage doth thereby authorize and justify his error, for nothing can give more boldness or confidence to a mistake, than a belief that it is backed with Scripture. That this is one of his grand stratagems may be sufficiently evinced, from the infinite number of errors that pretend to Scripture warrant. Those that are above or beyond Scripture, which acknowledge no dependence upon it, are but few and rare, and indeed among Christians error cannot well thrive without a pretense of Scripture. Men would have enough to do to persuade themselves to such errors, but it would be impossible to make a party or persuade others. Such errors would presently be hissed out of the world. Upon this account, is it that atheism skulks and conceals itself, except where generally tolerated profaneness gives it more than ordinary encouragement, which is not to be ascribed to any shamefaced modesty that atheisms can be supposed to nourish, but to the general dislike of others, who so stick to the authority of the Bible, that they reject all direct contradictions to it, with great abhorrency. Hence also, it is that some erroneous persons are forced to contradictions, in their practice against their professed principles, because they find it impossible to propagate their errors without some pretense or other to Scripture. They that would undermine those sacred records, are forced to make use of their authority for proof of what they would say. The Papists have a quarrel at them, and envy them the title of perfection and perspicuity, upon design to introduce traditions, and to set up the Pope's judicial authority in matters of faith. And when they have said all they can to subject the Scriptures to the Pope's determination, they are forced at last to be beholden to the Scriptures, to prove the Pope's determination. They would prove the Scriptures by the Church, and then the Church by the Scriptures, which is a circle they have been often told of, and of which some of the wiser sort among themselves are ashamed. Others also that will not allow the Scriptures to be a general standing rule, are yet forced to make it, in some cases, a rule to themselves, and eagerly plead it to be so to others. They that pretend to be above ordinances, and decry outward teachings as unnecessary or hurtful, yet they teach outwardly, because they see they are not able to enlarge the empire of error, without such teaching. Those very errors that make it their chief business, to render the Scriptures no better than an old almanac, they yet seek to Scripture to countenance their blasphemous assertions. And if they get any scrap or shred of it that may by their unjust torture be wrested to speak any such thing, or anything toward it, they think all their follies are thereby patronized. 2 Peter 3:16. And commonly such men either fix upon such places as give warning of the necessary concomitances of the spirit and heart, with the outward act of service, and from hence separating what God hath joined together, they set up spiritual Sabbaths, spiritual baptism, spiritual worship, to cry down and cashier the external acts of such ordinances, or they pretend kindred to Scripture, as prophesying or foretelling those new administrations, which they are about to set up. Let H. Nicholas be an instance of this, who, though he decried the service of the law under God the Father, and the service of the belief under Christ, and in the room of both these would set up another administration under the Spirit. Yet, that he might be the better believed, he applied several scriptures to his purpose, as prophetically foretelling H. Nicholas and his services, and would have men imagine, that he was that angel flying in the midst of heaven, with the everlasting gospel, Revelations 14:6. And that prophet inquired after by the Jews, John 1:21, Art thou that prophet? And that man ordained to judge the world, Acts 17:31. And that the times of his dispensation, were the times of perfection and glory spoken of, in 1 Corinthians 13:9, and Hebrews 6:1. The like pretenses for new administrations had Saltmarsh and several others. Satan, fixing his foot upon this design, and taking advantage of men's ignorance, curiosity, and pride, etc., it is impossible to tell what he may do. He hath introduced many heresies already, and none knows what may be behind. Many passages of Scripture are dark to the wisest of men, a great many more are so to the common sort of Christians. A great many wits are employed by him as adventurers for new discoveries, and a small pretense, is ground enough for a bold undertaker to erect a new notion upon. And a new notion in religion is like a new fashion in apparel, which bewitcheth the unsteady with an itch to be in it, before they well understand what it is. So that it is alike impossible to stint the just number of errors, as to adjust the various pretenses from Scripture upon which they may be countenanced. Leaving, therefore, this task to those that can undertake it, I shall only note a particular or two of Satan's cunning, in affixing an error upon Scripture. Thanks.